Back here on the GSMC Chip Shop Football Podcast, I'm still your host, Manny Maradiegue. If you weren't able to join me for the first two segments, the last segment I talked about was the NFL and potentially changing a rule, banning the drop hit tackle completely from the NFL, and just my thoughts on it, what could happen if this rule was changed, and all the sort of little details that could come into effect if this rule was able to go through and you wouldn't see the drop hip tackle anymore in the NFL. I'm able to talk about the Seahawks now and moving into their quarterback situation under new head coach Mike Macdonald and what he had to say about the two quarterbacks on his staff. But before I move into that, I want to remind you guys again to please engage with the episode. If you do decide to leave a comment, a question in this live episode, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link that you see running across the ticker below me with any of those questions that you may have. The tip and donations link, if you're not able to see it, it's a new one that we have today. It's gsmcsportsnetwork.net. Again, if you're not able to see it, it's gsmcsportsnetwork.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question a lot smoother if it just pops up here on the right side of my screen. And I always love interacting with you guys with any questions that you may have. And it's greatly appreciated if you're able to do that. But that allows me to move on to the next topic that I have lined up here around the Seahawks and their quarterback situation. It's one that I think a lot of people don't bring up. It's one that has kind of gone under the radar just because, the Seahawks aren't really known for making a big move, aren't known or haven't been very active so far in free agency. But with the NFL Combine going on, everyone's being asked questions about their organization, their team, and what's going on. One of them being Mike Macdonald. I thought, personally, this was one of the more interesting and one of the moves that I agreed upon more for the Seahawks to hire Mike Macdonald for their organization now that they decided to move on from Pete Carroll. He obviously had a great season as the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, arguably the best defense in the NFL last year. Now he gets to move up and has a great opportunity with the Seahawks now that they're trying to reincarnate their defense, get back to that defensive side of the ball, that mentality that they had so many years beforehand with the Legion of Boom and everything like that, all the success that they had with the defense. Now they usher in Mike Macdonald. He kind of brings that. He has some decisions to make, though, with the Seahawks and their offensive side of the ball, not so much their defense. It's been talked about a lot, the kind of money that Geno Smith is making, the sort of contract that he's on. Drew Lock as well being included in those conversations just because last year Geno Smith was hurt a lot of the time, and we saw Drew Lock, I want to say for 4 or 5 games there towards the end, that he had some good performances, one against the Philadelphia Eagles, and then other ones where it didn't look so great. He might have had a few turnovers or a good amount of turnovers, and now the Seahawks fans are in a bit of a rough spot because, trying to usher in a new era, trying to get everything under wraps. The biggest part of that is the quarterback position, obviously, and they already had other questions going into this. They're in a tough division, in a pretty wide open conference that they want to compete in because there's only really 1 or 2 favorites now in the conference overall. I think anybody has a good shot of it if they're able to align all their ducks and get everything under control. And with the quarterback specifically, they asked Mike Macdonald at the Combine there, like I mentioned, about the two quarterbacks, and they specifically asked Mike Macdonald if Geno and Drew were both involved in the future of the organization going forward. And his exact words were, "That's a tough question, and it's one that I probably can't answer right now." And he went on to say he's still getting to know them, quite honestly, on a personal level, and that potentially one, both, or maybe neither of them would be involved in the future going forward. And that's really interesting to say, as a head coach coming into this organization, it's a pretty bold thing to say, in my opinion. Just, a lot of the times the coach just come in. A lot of the times some might not want to move the ship, might not want to ride the ship too much in their first season, and really not try to mess anything up. Just try to get through, and if good things happen, that's great. If not, they don't lose their job in the first season. For Mike Macdonald to say this, again, it was pretty bold to say, but at the same time, I kind of liked it in a sense that he's coming in with a mentality that, he's being very honest and a very up forward sort of coach, at least from the comments that he just said. And with Geno and Drew Lock, I think they've kind of just gone by with both of them. Geno Smith, on one hand, was this, I think at one point was this great story. He got over his time with the Jets where it was really bad, and now he found a home with the Seattle Seahawks, and after one good season in 2022, most recently one good season, he signed that big contract, that 3 year, $75 million contract. After that 2022 season, he got that contract, and then after that, he kind of tailed off a little bit. The numbers weren't really there for him. The Seahawks, I want to say, finished 9-8 in the last two seasons with him under the helm. He is going to be 31 years old, if I remember correctly. And now, they're at a point where the age is starting to become a factor. The recent performances don't really back him at this point with the organization and what they want to do with him. And they actually had to restructure his deal leading up to this episode, and early in the free agency period, they actually converted that $9.6 million roster bonus into a signing bonus, basically cutting it in half or creating $4.8 million in cap space. This also, in turn, raises his cap hit to nearly $39 million for 2025 if they were still to keep him under contract, which I think is a serious consideration right now, considering where they are and considering that Mike Macdonald isn't really all in on either of them. There's a lot of things he might have to change with this roster, going up and down this roster. They don't have a lot of cap space. They're in a cap deficit currently. And like I mentioned, Geno will take a huge cap hit next offseason, but they also have other guys like Tyler Lockett, who is on another big contract and who is currently taking a lot of that cap space with his contract. That's another situation that I won't really dive into, but that's another thing that the Seahawks have to consider because of, how much production he's going to give you. He's older now. He's a household name in Seattle. He's given them a lot of good things, but now with a new head coach, that they don't have that sentimental connection really to them as Pete Carroll would potentially. So it could be easier, but a lot of tough decisions could be down the road for them. And in terms of Drew Lock and where he stands in all of this, he's actually a free agent in March officially, and he kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want to commit to him too much. He was a backup for the majority of his time. Really, in the NFL, he only had 1 year where he played more than 9 or 8 games in Denver. And with Seattle, he's just, really accepted that backup role. He's been with them at a point where he'll come in to step in when Geno Smith isn't available, where when he's needed to really, and he's been sort of a game manager, not really wasting too many opportunities to come in, do his job and not really waste anything at that point. At the same time, it's difficult with him. If you decide not to sign him, you get rid of one, but then you're stuck with Geno Smith, and then, where do you go from there? If he were to get hurt or if he were to move on from him, are you willing and ready to move on or to look for another quarterback right away under a new head coach, under already a lot of things that you have to worry about? Where do you stand with that, and where do you stand on that process of trying to move on with a quarterback? Because, a lot of teams that resets everything. You look at other franchises that are still looking for their franchise guy, not to mention already like the Bears, the Commanders, the Vikings to some extent, the Raiders, all these teams. It's a lot easier said than done to find a quarterback with that, or at least that could take you far in the playoffs and in the regular season. It's going to be tough for either of these guys to do it and for the Seahawks to move on with one of these guys because of, like I mentioned, the age, the contract, and everything. The Seahawks have a lot to figure out and really what to do with his defense as well because Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner are also free agents. I'm sure they'd love to shore up that offensive line. There's good free agents out there, but they have to figure out where the money should go, where they should allocate all those things. With the NFL Combine going on, there's a good opportunity for them to meet with these other teams and with these other representatives of the quarterbacks especially. And nothing has been really said after this with regards to the quarterbacks, Geno Smith or Drew Lock. A lot of times with the NFL Combine being there, you have Saquon's representatives, Tua's representatives going to the Combine and meeting with the members of the organization. Nothing has been reported on the Seahawks end, what they're going to do with their quarterbacks. But, it's, in a way, if you think about it, for the quarterbacks, Geno Smith, Drew Lock, more specifically Geno, because more likely than not, he will be the starter. I don't see the Seahawks making a drastic move, but this should really light a fire under him, try to motivate him in a way. He has to prove himself all over again for this new coach. Doesn't really know too much about him. He has to go out there and prove himself once again. And I think that would not only do wonders for Geno Smith, but it could buy the Seahawks some more time if they're able to get the best out of Geno with these sort of comments and produce 1 or 2 more years of him at an average to above average level. If he's able to do that, I think it gives him more time, obviously, to rebuild that defense, which is slowly getting back to a very competitive level. Drafting Devin Witherspoon. You have to figure out what you do with Jamal Adams. But Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen, I think, were great picks in the secondary. They have to find a bit more pass rush and figure out what they want to do with those linebackers. But, it's slowly getting there. And I think defensively, I'm not really worried about them. But offensively, they have to figure out what to do with the O-line. Like I mentioned, the quarterbacks and such like that. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process, but at least they're in a spot right now where this could turn into a positive is basically what I'm trying to say in the end, because with Mike Macdonald coming in here, it's a good prove-it chance for these quarterbacks. If they want a job in the NFL being one of the quarterbacks, it's a great chance to do so. And Geno Smith, like I mentioned, is a bit older. Drew Lock could come in, re-sign with the Seahawks, and prove it more than Geno Smith. And now he's got a job, and he could change the trajectory of his career with that sort of move. You don't really know what could play from this, but it was something that drew my attention because of, everybody talking about the Bears, the Raiders, the Vikings. The Seahawks aren't really set on their quarterback whatsoever. I wanted to bring it up here and talk about that. But the NFL now currently is filled with quarterback questions. One of the biggest ones, ironically, is with the New York Giants that extended their current quarterback to a long-term deal, but now it seems there's more questions than ever around him and what they should do with him. A lot of reports are saying from New York that General Manager Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll could be on the hot seat, and what are they willing to do to save their job? And if it's really the best for the Giants organization in the long run, that discussion and whether the Giants should trade up or not is going to come in the last segment of the show. I'm going to send it to a quick break right now, and I'm going to bring you guys that topic after this break to break down what the Giants should do, in my estimation, with Daniel Jones and within the draft this coming offseason.